Welcome to the Baseball Coaches Rules meeting. My name is Emily Gates and I am the OHSAA Baseball Sport Administrator. Also on this presentation is our Director of Officiating Development, Dan McGinnis, who will be detailing the NFHS baseball rule changes later in the presentation. Thank you for taking the time to view this required rules meeting. A quick note before we continue, if you are using a Chromebook, we strongly recommend you stop and use a different device to view this presentation. If you choose to proceed with using a Chromebook, please be aware that your attendance may not record it or the presentation may stop. We've had some issues in the past of people using Chromebooks, and please also know that this is not the same as the Chrome internet browser. It's its own device. As you all know, the rules meeting is a requirement for all head coaches to view for all of our varsity sports. We always encourage any assistant coaches to view the rules meeting, but it is only required for the head coach to view this for the season. Attendance will be reflected immediately on your myOHSAA profile, and the athletic director may also view this from their school profile on myOHSAA. The purpose of the rules meeting is to remind you all about our OHSAA administrative rules and to provide a few reminders on the NFHS rules reminders and, most importantly, any NFHS rule changes and points of emphasis for the season. As we are all aware, the COVID-19 pandemic is ever-changing, and our organization, member schools, and officials must be able to respond appropriately to guidelines and orders provided from the federal or national level. Things may look different from when you first view this rules meeting to the middle or even the end of the season, but the OHSAA will make sure to send out communication to necessary parties with any updates or information. Rule modifications and recommendations will be addressed later in this presentation as it relates to COVID-19 guidelines. We appreciate your understanding. In addition to the rules meeting, we have several resources that will be very beneficial to you prior to, during, and after the baseball season, and ask that you take some time to review these documents. First is the baseball manual, which covers all items mentioned in this rules meeting in depth, along with frequently asked questions. Its purpose is to be a one-stop shop for any rules or regulations in the sport of baseball. Also on the baseball webpage are the general sport regulations and our tournament regulations. We have also posted on the baseball webpage any issues of This Week in Baseball coaches memos. All previous and future memos will be sent to the baseball coach listed in myOHSAA and will also be posted on This Week in Baseball section on the baseball website. Please make sure to review these as they provide important information and reminders specific to the time of the year they are sent. Last is the tournament information page that is on our baseball webpage. This will be more important closer to tournament time, of course, but will have all necessary tournament information, including the brackets, once they are posted. Moving on to the requirements to be a coach in the state of Ohio, let's talk about the Pupil Activity and Coaching Permit, otherwise known as the PAP. So this is an item that is required by law in the state of Ohio for all coaches to obtain. This is a reminder that this is for a paid and any volunteer head coach or assistant coach on your staff. This is the first of many times you will hear this, but all volunteer coaches are treated the same as paid coaches with respect to our rules and regulations, so please keep that in mind. So to obtain the PAP, an individual must complete the 6 listed requirements that you see. So they must hold a current and valid CPR card, complete an approved sports first aid course, complete and submit a background check, complete the NFHS Fundamentals of Coaching course, and as well as the concussion course, which is valid for 3 years. And new to this past year, all coaches must view the sudden cardiac arrest education video, otherwise known as Lindsay's Law. This is made by the Ohio Department of Education, otherwise known as the ODE. They will issue the required PAP, which is valid for a 3-year period. Concussions have been at the forefront of injury prevention the last few years, and with that, concussion prevention deservedly should be addressed. Coaches and officials continue to have the authority to remove players for exhibiting the signs or symptoms of concussions. The required first aid training that we have from the concussion course from the NFHS Learn website for both coaches and athletes will help both parties recognize concussion symptoms. We also have concussion resources on our website. We have a Sports Safety and Concussion Resources tab under our Sport Medicine area. So please, if you do not feel comfortable in this area, please view this information even if it's just a refresher. Any player that is removed from a practice or contest cannot return to participate on the same day as being removed for symptoms of a concussion under no circumstances. Please pay attention to your athletes and concussions and visit our concussion resources page on our website. Moving on to some of the OHSAA administrative rules, coaching, tryouts, and instruction may begin on Monday, February 22nd. Please remember that only the listed may take place prior to February 22nd, and none of the lists can be made mandatory. No instruction or drills from the coaching staff are permitted during weightlifting, conditioning, or open gyms. Coaches may supervise these programs, but again, there can be no skill or instruction taught during these programs. Everything must be voluntary and student-led. Any open gym or field must be considered free and unstructured play. Though I will cover it in a bit more detail, the individual instruction regulations should be a great benefit to coaches, allowing them to work with their players anytime inside or outside of the season, with the exception of the no contact period, which occurs from August 1st to August 31st. The first date games are permitted for the 2021 season is Saturday, March 27th. There may be no games played prior to this date. If there are, a penalty will be applied, which is removal from the postseason tournament. We realize this is a later season start date and that it may conflict with spring break trips you tend to take as a school baseball team. This is a reminder that you may still travel out of state and compete in scrimmages, but please make sure you are following our out-of-state policies, which will be addressed shortly. Moving on to more administrative rules, each sponsored team at your school is permitted 4 scrimmages, and those scrimmages can be held any time during the season, including during tournament time. There's no limit to the number of teams that may participate in a scrimmage. However, there is a limit of 3 hours of competition. If you participate against 2 other schools on the same day, as long as it's on the same day, it only counts as 1 scrimmage. Previews may be held between the start of the season and your first contest, and admission may be charged. The main aspect of a preview is that it may only be 1/2 in length, so it only can be half of a game. If you are possibly playing against 2 opponents in a preview, the total length may still only be 1/2. Once practice begins, please know that you are not mandated to hold a specific number of days for tryouts or hours per day. That is up to you unless you are limited by your school. There's no limit on number of players you are permitted to keep on your roster, but please remember that the only time there is a limitation of roster size is during tournament time. You are permitted to schedule a total of 27 games permitted on 27 playing dates. If anyone exceeds the 27 scheduled game, this results in removal from the postseason tournament, so please do not exceed the number of games permitted per season. And just keep in mind there may be no more than 2 games in one day. For player limitations, players are permitted to play on 32 playing dates. Keep in mind that a doubleheader would count as 1 date. And just like the contest limitations, exceeding the 32 playing dates results in player ineligibility. This also forces the coaches to track this carefully throughout the season. I definitely want to address playing contests with out-of-state schools, as your sport is one of the sports we see most with schools traveling out of state. So a bit of general information, you are permitted to scrimmage out of state, and the biggest component is that the contest or scrimmage you participate in must be classified the same for both schools participating. So if your team is traveling to Florida to play in what you have scheduled as a scrimmage, it must be counted as a scrimmage by the team you are playing against as well. So the Ohio school can't count it as a scrimmage when the other school is classifying it as a game. You cannot travel out of state for practice only. You may practice if you have a scrimmage or a game scheduled. All games must be played by the official NFHS rules in the sport, and all games must have licensed officials from that state. So also keep in mind that the Ohio administrative rules must be followed as well. So if you are traveling to a bordering state, this is permitted an unlimited amount of times throughout the season. You are permitted to miss school time. And again, you are permitted to practice while out of state for a scrimmage or game. And if you are traveling to a non-bordering state, you are only permitted to do this one time per season, and you are now permitted to miss school time. This is new for 2021, but again, you are permitted to practice while out of state for that scrimmage or game in a non-bordering state as well. On the subject of games, something that has grown in importance the past few years needs attention as part of this meeting. Things to consider when you agree to play an opponent. First, all games are agreed upon by a formal written contract. League schedules are considered binding agreements as well. When you agree to play a game, you are agreeing to just that, to play the game. So you cannot drop on an opponent midstream just because you don't want to play them, nor can you drop an opponent just to make a league game up instead. But, and I know this is done regularly, if both teams agree to not play, of course you can do that, but the opponent has to agree. You also have to agree to make a game up that is suspended or canceled, again, pending whether both teams agree not to do so. I mention this in detail as more and more contract disputes are coming into our office for resolution, and it becomes rather easy to deal with. A contract is a contract. And you may find this hard to believe, as it is becoming more and more of an issue, but entering into a contract is also an agreement to the umpires hired for the contest and the decisions made by those umpires. So things to consider when contracting a game: you are agreeing to the umpires that will work the game. You are agreeing to abide by all decisions of the umpires. You agree to play the game, and you agree to make up the game if canceled. Before going into too many rules, I just wanted to remind you of the definition of a member of a school team. So a student is defined as a member of the school team once they participate in a scrimmage, preview, or contest for the school team. By OHSAA regulation, players are permitted to participate in any non-interscholastic program until they participate in one of the above for the school or the start of the season date, whichever comes first, even if they have already been practicing with the school team. Once they participate in a scrimmage, preview, or contest for the school, they may no longer participate in any non-interscholastic program until their season has concluded. The NFHS asks states to implement their own pitch count rule. Shown is the pitch count rule for the state of Ohio that must be followed by all of our member schools. Please remember that the umpire is not the individual to enforce this, the school is. As mentioned in 1.75, each school is required to track this information for their pitchers, and coaches are able to double check this information in between innings with each other. The expectation from the OHSAA is that all baseball coaches are recording this information properly and honestly, and we will be quick to speak with any school that we have been informed of not doing so. The rationale of the pitch count rule is to ensure arm safety for our student athletes, and we expect all of our member schools to respect their student athletes' health and ability. We do have a pitch count committee that is made up of coaches from across the state, working to make sure this pitch rule meets the needs of our state. We will continue to monitor how this is working with our member schools and will make changes and/or improvements when necessary. When this regulation is not followed, that essentially means a pitcher is pitching as an ineligible pitcher or player. Using an ineligible pitcher in a contest results in forfeiture of the game. The sports regulation that you will probably deal with the most is General Sport Regulation 7, also referred to as the Non-Interscholastic Rule. This regulation addresses what can and cannot occur inside and outside of the season. During the season, players may not work out, try out, or participate in any way with any non-school program. So this includes travel, legion, club, church, etc. They may also not work out, try out, practice, or participate with any type of college ID camp or showcase. And there is an exception for 2021, which I will discuss in a moment. But If a student athlete violates Sport Regulation 7, they are immediately considered ineligible for the remainder of the season. And just a reminder that using an ineligible player means a forfeit. And also a quick note, players can receive outside private instruction during the season as long as it is individual skill training and not any type of team play. So as I mentioned, new for 2021, we are providing a college ID camp waiver. So this is due to the changes in the NCAA recruiting periods. So this allows a student athlete a one-time waiver for the spring of 2021 to attend an identification camp after the student athlete has participated in a school scrimmage, preview, or game. So this waiver only applies to individual workouts and camps that are put on by a college or university, so not any type of team or club showcases. And all of these events must take place prior to the start of the 2021 spring tournament postseason. So upon returning from the ID camp, the student athlete must follow all school policies to return to scholastic team play as well. And this waiver must be submitted to me for approval prior to the event with approval from the coach and the athletic director. Sport Regulations 7.2 and 7.3 define many of the. If you take a look at all of the items on the screen, these are the ways you can coach outside of the season. First is the individual instruction regulation, which I will cover in a bit more detail here in a few moments. But the key pieces to remember are you cannot provide individual instruction during no contact periods. You are limited to 6 student athletes in all combined facilities, and weightlifting may occur at the same time. So there may be no open gyms or conditioning, that type of thing. It just needs to be individual instruction. For open gyms, we kind of covered those already, but just keep in mind that they are not permitted during the no contact period and there may be no instruction. Also, in previous years, all sport coaches were limited to only working with more than 50% of their athletes for a total of 10 days throughout the summer. This rule has been eliminated for 2021, so you may coach an unlimited amount of your players from June 1st to July 31st without a 10-day restriction. And just a reminder that a school coach is permitted to coach their own student athletes on a non-school team outside of the season as long as the 50% limitation is applied. Again, the 50% limitation is not applied during the summer months. A few more details on coaching your own players from your school team and team play outside of the season. Like I said, you can coach your school players on a non-school team, but you cannot coach them during the no contact period, which for spring sports is August 1st to August 31st. There remains a limit of 4 players from your school team on your non-school team roster. This should happen anyway, since there are only allowed to be 4 players on a non-school team during this time. But please reference the sport webpage for more information and also the frequently asked questions in the coach's manual. Now moving on to the individual instruction regulation, Sport Regulation 8.3. So the purpose of this is to allow coaches the opportunity to provide instruction that is not permitted for time in open gyms or fields, and to provide that same type of instruction outside of the season that private instructors can. So it's really great if you're able to, work with a smaller focus of student athletes, maybe focusing on different areas, that type of thing. But keep in mind that this is just for instruction and it is not an opportunity to hold a full additional practice outside of the season. So what you can do, this is where the update occurs for Sport Regulation 8.3. You are now permitted to instruct up to 6 individuals in all combined facilities. And just keep in mind again that it can only be individual skill instruction. So hitting, fielding, or pitching techniques are examples. It can't be any type of team play. So what you can't do team drills with more than 6 individuals present. One example of this is if you're providing pitching techniques to 6 on the field while there are 6 others in a cage hitting. It is 6 individuals present in all combined facilities. One topic that you might not have to deal with too much is dealing with student-athlete transfer issues. The first thing you need to do is consult with your athletic director, as this is a school administrative issue to deal with. They must meet one of the transfer exceptions to participate. Depending on the outcome of the transfer information, student-athlete transfers must sit out of the second half of the season in the OHSAA tournament. As soon as you know you have a student-athlete who is a transfer, please consult with your school administrators so they may start any necessary paperwork. One of your requirements as head coach is to rate your officials after your game. It is an important part of the tournament assignment process and is now required by OHSAA regulation. Rating assures the coach's input is into the tournament assignment process. The process takes place in the myOHSAA system by logging into your myOHSAA account that is associated with your school profile. You will be reminded of this important requirement throughout the season. The OHSAA wants to reiterate that no matter how you feel about the officiating, please do not ever take your team off the field and go home. If done so, penalties shall apply, including a meeting with the OHSAA Executive Director and possible suspension. And just a quick reminder, as media coverage and social media websites continue to put more and more focus on high school teams, think first before any negative comments are made on or to a media outlet. OHSAA regulations prohibit negative comments and any public criticism of officials in the media, and that includes social media. And please remind your players. We hope this is a topic that you don't have to deal with much, but to cover ejections, here's what happens. When a player is ejected, he or she is to remain in the bench area under the supervision of a coach or school administrator. The last thing we want is an ejected player running off to the locker room, school, or bus. They must be supervised. They are also ineligible for any contest for the remainder of the day. For example, if they are ejected from a JV contest, they are ineligible for any other contest that day, such as a varsity game. They are also ineligible for all contests until 2 at the level of the ejection have been played. During the time of the ejection, they may practice with the team, but are not permitted to ride to and from the game with the team, nor are they permitted to sit in the team area, dugout, or be in the locker room prior to, during, or after the game. The players may not be in uniform and cannot participate in any part of warm-ups. If you as a coach are ejected, you are required to leave the facility immediately. The coach is ineligible to coach in any contest for the remainder of the day of the ejection, and also is ineligible to coach in games until 2 games at the level of the ejection have taken place. An ejected coach may not sit with the team, be in the dugout, may not be in the locker room prior to, during, or after the game. They may sit in the stands, but they cannot be giving instruction from a different location. Additionally, any ejected coach must complete the NFHS Teaching and Modeling Behavior course and must pay a $100 fine to the OHSAA's Respect the Game program. Even when officials do not notify the school, the ejection protocol must still be enforced. And please remember that there are no appeals over ejections. The lightning and inclement weather policy is one that is a national rule in all 50 states. The sound of thunder or the visible sighting of lightning necessitates an immediate 30-minute delay in play, even when you are at the 29-minute mark and thunder sounds. Here we go, but another 30-minute delay begins at that point. As we all know, Ohio struggles with severe weather during the spring season, so make it a point to know your school's crisis management plan. One important reminder that I do provide is an important one relative to the administration or management of a contest. As you know, as a head coach, being a head coach entails so many responsibilities beyond simply coaching. Sometimes overlooked is the fact that our regulations require someone to be responsible for the contest itself, even if it is a JV or junior high game. Oftentimes, especially in sub-varsity games, that someone is the coach. We have made it a point to remind coaches and athletic directors of this responsibility. These responsibilities include safeguarding officials before, during, and after a contest, dealing with unruly fans, and dealing with medical emergencies, coordinating inclement weather crisis plan, and any other things that may come about during a game. You really should take a moment or two with your JV coach and review a few items on this before his or her first contest. Part of the responsibility and the game limitation from OHSAA regulations is being able to describe what a completed game means. So a game is considered complete if the coach and the plate umpire mutually agree to end a game early. So one example is when a team has a tremendous lead and both coaches agree to end the game. Anytime a team has a 10-run lead and the losing team has completed its turn at bat in the 5th inning, when the home team takes a 10-run lead in the 5th inning, and when the game has gone beyond the 5th inning and the game is called for any reason. The score stands and the game is over unless it meets one of the following exceptions. Now this is where it can get a bit confusing, so let's take a look at what happens after the 5th inning. If a game is called or suspended prior to the completion of a full inning after the 5th inning, and the visiting team has scored one or more runs to tie the score or to take the lead and the home team has not retaken the lead, the game is suspended. If any time after the 5th inning the home team is ahead going into the bottom half of the inning and the game is stopped, the game is over. This is an Ohio required regulation. Schools and/or leagues are not afforded the luxury of deciding whether they want or don't want to follow this. It is required. If a suspended game is never made up, it simply goes down as a no contest and you can replace it with another game on your schedule. There are many situations in which a suspended game is completed prior to the start of another game, as is often the case in league games. Regardless of the number of innings, you can do this without counting it as a doubleheader. This is important for games during the week. Just a reminder, when a suspended game is completed, it shall be continued from the point of suspension with batting orders and the lineups the same. Substitutions may be made, and any player that may have been suspended from the original contest is suspended and not able to play in the resumed game. I receive inquiries about field diagrams and several questions about things like where the fence or dugout should be located, that type of thing. This field diagram is located in the NFHS rules book. If you do not have a rules book, we can provide you one for a fee at the OHSAA office, or if you are working on building a new stadium or field, those individuals can reach out to me with any questions regarding requirements for the field. Looking ahead to tournament time, I wanted to address how our tournaments are structured. The OHSAA is made up of 6 athletic districts, with each district electing 9 representatives to a district athletic board. The function of the DAB is to organize and run the sectional and district tournaments in their respective districts. The number of teams in a division in a district determines how many teams are permitted to qualify to the regional tournament. This explains why the Northwest receives more, for example, Division III regional qualifiers than, say, the Southeast District. There are simply more Division III teams in the Northwest than there are in the Southeast. The OHSAA staff directly coordinates the regional and state tournaments, but all our levels are conducted under a set of adopted tournament regulations, which I mentioned earlier, which are located on our baseball webpage. Please see the posted date for this year's regional and state tournaments. This is a great time to also encourage you to become a member of the Ohio High School Baseball Coaches Association. The OHBCA makes annual recommendations to the OHSAA's Board of Directors, so please make sure you are working with them if there are issues or areas of improvement in the sport of baseball. As you can see, these are a few members of the OHSAA-BCA board, but please take a moment to look at their website to become familiar with your district representatives that are great voices for baseball coaches across the state. Now we will move into the NFHS rules portion of the meeting, where I will turn it over to the Director of Officiating Development for Baseball, Dan McGinnis. I will now turn it over to Dan McGinnis, our Baseball Director of Officiating Development. He is our rules expert and will be covering the NFHS rule changes and points of emphasis.
The coaches, in this case, wanted to be able to bat a player once he was taken out of the game on defense. This way, saving the arms of pitchers was the main focus, but also applies to any player, not just a pitcher. This is where we differ a little bit from college. You'll notice in Rule 314, we struck out a starting defensive player cannot be listed as a designator hitter in the lineup or in the startup. So that's the big change this year. We're going to delve into that real quick. We're going to be discussing a change in the DH, but what has stayed the same is a team forfeits the use of a DH if he fails to declare the DH prior to the game. And if a pinch hitter or pinch runner for the designated hitter is used, that player becomes a new DH. Those are the same as they were in previous years. So what has changed in the DH? Well, it's very dramatic. If you notice in 314, it now reads a designated hitter may be used in one of two scenarios. The designated hitter the first one may be a 10th starter hitting for any one of the 9 starting. That's the current rule that we've been under for the last many years. If that DH is used in this manner, the role of DH is terminated for the remainder of the game when the defensive player or any previous defensive player for whom the DH batted subsequently bats, pinch hits, pinch runs for the designated hitter, or the designated hitter or any previous designated hitter assumes a defensive position. The real change will provide coaches some options to strategize how to keep their better players in the game, but yet really just to continue to protect the arms of the players. The college rule basically is the DH can also be the pitcher, but in this case, it could actually be say a shortstop, where he is the shortstop and the DH. So he's got 2 spots in the lineup. Now, one of the issues that was just asked, and we just addressed it, and I'll be addressing it again, is can a DH in that case where the player and the DH is the same person, can they be courtesy run for during the game? And the answer to that is no. Because anytime a substitute is made on offense being a runner or a batter for that DH, then the DH, that whole thing is gone. That person now is in the game. So that's kind of really simple. We'll go through many of the scenarios here in the next few slides, but just wanted to let you know that it can be for any player, and they were just trying to keep better players in the game. They were tired of pulling a kid out because his arm might be sore and then he lost his bat. So in this case, they're able to do that. Well, now this season we're going to be able to see 3 different ways the coaches can use a lineup card. The first one is the very simple way, 9 straight batters, no big deal, positions covered. We can go back to the current situation where the DH may still be a 10th starting hitting for any of the 9 starting defensive players. In this case, it has Daniels listed on the lineup card. While there's really no change from the previous DH rule, when using a standard designated hitter, the role of the DH is terminated when we always use offense to defense or defense to offense. But this reads when the defensive player for whom the DH batted subsequently bats, pinch hits, or pinch runs. So that would, as we know, that eliminates the DH. And just to go along with the previous slide, in this case, it would be if the remainder of the game, it would be eliminated if the designated hitter, any person designated hitter, assumes a defensive. So that's what I mentioned earlier, offense to defense, defense to offense, then your DH will be eliminated for the balance of the game. And now the third way they can do the lineup is having the DH be a starting defensive player. Any player, any position, does not have to be, and I'll repeat, does not have to be the pitcher. This is not the college rule. That player then holds 2 positions on the lineup card. You'll notice Daniels in the number 4 spot, he is listed as the first baseman and the DH. Well, in the case where the player is listed as a starting DH and a starting defensive player, that person does have re-entry into the defensive position. In this case, Daniels is the first baseman. He can be taken out as first baseman, replaced by, in this case, Jackson, we'll say, and Jackson would be the defensive player, and but Daniels would still remain the DH. Daniels then can subsequently come back into the game as a defensive player because he was a starter and has that opportunity. When we are using a player DH, the role of the DH is terminated for the remainder of the game when any player substitutes offensively for the DH. That also includes courtesy runners. Ohio, we don't use them during league play, but during non-league play, we were asked, well, I have a pitcher who's also the DH, and we want to have a speed-up rule. Can somebody come in and run for him if he gets on base? The answer to that is they can, but that person now is in the game in that position, so the DH in that case would be eliminated. To go along with the previous slide, in this case, they had the player DH as substituted as a hitter or a runner. We know that that runner now would be in the game, but we also want to clarify that even a pinch runner to help speed the game up would be considered in the game.
Now Dan and I will cover some of the NFHS points of emphasis.
Just trying to make sure everybody's straight on the designated hitter. Now again, there are now two options that are using designated hitter. The team may also choose to use a straight 9-man lineup. And again, they all must be declared prior to the start of the game. During non-league play in Ohio, the courtesy runner can be used, but never any function with the designated hitter. When a DH comes to bat, he is a DH regardless of either lineup option. Okay. When at bat, he can never assume a defensive position. As a result, the courtesy runner is never a legal substitute for a DH. Here's the example. If a DH is batting and gets on base, and a runner comes in to replace him on the base, it is a legal substitute, and that player is now the DH. If the DH is a player DH, he is batting as a DH. A substitute by an offensive player would eliminate the role of the DH. This is the real difference between the two DHs. If a substitute with a player DH, if he's replaced on offense, that person now is in the lineup, and they're basically doing a 9-man lineup. He has replaced the player DH. Game-ending procedures in Ohio, we have adopted the 10-run rule after 5 innings, or in the case of the home team winning, after 4.5 at-bats. We can also end a game, as everybody knows, if both coaches and the umpires to agree to end the game at any time during that game. Once you've hit that run rule, or that 10 after 5, please stop the game. Your job is done. Leave the field. Do not continue on. There's liabilities, potentials that we could have some issues with, so the game is over. Time to leave. Forced play slide rule. Every year we have to continue to reinforce the rules to the coaches. On a forced play going into second base, runners are not required to slide, but if they do, it must be legal, and that legal slide can either be feet first or head first. If the runner slides feet first, at least one leg and buttock must be on the ground. Now he can also peel off and not interfere with the throw. So that also is part of that caveat that we have about the forced play. As long as he doesn't interfere, he can peel off and not have to slide, basically giving himself up. Here's where we have some issues with the forced play slide rule, and I would expect the plate umpire be definitely the one that would see this. Typically the base umpire is making a call and turning to then make the call at first base. So plate guys, be cognizant of the issue. Get out from behind the plate, get between first base and the mound, so you got a good angle on this, because runners may have a tendency to pop up into that fielder. Again, we're going to have immediate dead ball. We're going to get 2 outs and no runners advance. For the legal slide on a forced play slide rule, or in any slide here in this case, is the runner keeping a foot lower than the fielder's knee. We don't. It's a safety issue. In this case, probably the plate guy is going to have the best view of this one. We just don't want anybody getting cleated intentionally. Well, except at home plate, runners may not slide through or beyond the base and interfere with the play. We do know that the plate, you can slide through it now, and the catcher is not really protected beyond the bag. He's got to be careful. He should be out in front of it anyhow. But they are not allowed to slide through the bag and interfere with the play. It's kind of amazing how baseball's changed. Years ago, we changed the rule and basically said to runners, if they slide, cannot slide into a fielder. He can slide away from the fielder, but not into a fielder and avoid making contact or altering the play. 2 years ago, Major League Baseball even incorporated that, where in the past all they used to have to be able to do is to be able to reach the bag with one arm, and they could take out the fielder coming across the bag to make the double play. So for safety issues, even in the major leagues, they have gone to basically our force play slide rule. The runner is out when he illegally slides. In this case, you notice he's sliding in, but his foot is much higher than the knee of the fielder. And this is a force play. It really doesn't matter if it's force play or not. That's a safety issue there if it's not a force play. But on the force play, the interfering runner is out, but also the batter runner is also out. And that guy that went from third to home on this play now has to go back to third because now there's 2 outs and he is back at third base. One of my favorite topics that we fortunately or unfortunately didn't get to work on last year during 2020 was the standard for the high school baseball. And there has to be 2 stamps on that baseball, at least 2, and one of them being NFHS, authorization mark. Sometimes you'll see the OHSAA insignia. That works just fine. But the main importance now is the NOSCI mark, and it should be visible on the baseball. The NOCSAE mark. It can be very, very small. I've seen some, you can almost hardly read it. But they have to have that NOSCI seal. This came up to a bone of contention 4 or 5 years ago when they instituted. Coaches, and rightfully so, had bought up numerous baseballs. They did not want to basically throw them away. So we extended it a year, and then last year they again didn't have it seasoned. So there should be only baseballs out there that have the NOSCI seal for high school. If they do not have that seal on them, guys, we don't play. It's a safety issue in this case. Do not play. Years ago, and some states are saying what they want to do is go ahead and play, but write a report to the home office. We did that 2 years ago. So that was in effect in 2019. So that's what we went through. So coaches have had plenty of time, but please do not play baseball without that NOSCI on the baseball. Another addition to the rules, Rule 153 talks about the catcher shall wear, in addition to head protector, mask with throat protector. We all know what's going on. Cup for male. But then now we're asking that the NOSCI mark is required on all body chest protectors at the time of manufacture, and that must be used in high school competition. I'll show you here in a minute what we're talking about. They're going to have a new chest protector for this year, or there's a new thing that's out that can be used also. Again, this is up to the coaches to make sure that their equipment is legal. So at the plate conference, we ask the coaches, is all your equipment legal? Are your players properly prepared? And if he answers yes, he is stating that the catcher's body chest protector meets the NOSCI standard, and somewhere on that chest protector, there's going to be a NOSCI stamp. Okay, I went into the sporting goods store and looked all over it, and most of them had them. Sometimes they're very hard to find and maybe down by the straps. Nothing as visible as what you're showing here in the illustration, but they were on the new chest protectors. Well, after they had written this new address, the catcher's chest protector, a new product came out. It was called the Ark Reactor Core, which Sits inside. It's designed to attach to a non-certified chest protector so that it meets the NOSCI standard. So there is something that they can go out there and purchase. It would not be part of the what they're doing is they're taking older chest protectors and making them legal. Now, again, guys, that's up to the coaches to do that. So just wanted to be cognizant that if the coach asks about it, there is something out there. It's called the Ark Reactor Core, an accessory piece that can be added to protect the heart area is what we're after. Here is the rationale for the change in the rule. It says a catcher has to wear either a chest protector that meets the NOSCI standard or a body protector that meets the NOSCI standard underneath a traditional protector. Again, it's the responsibility of the coach to verify it. I'm not going down there to look, but at the plate meeting, make sure you ask the question, and he's going to verify that all his players are legally equipped. Our wonderful C flap. It still is out there, guys. I sent out 4 all calls last year. Even after that, I had one umpire call and say that he'd had a coach told him it was illegal, even though this was after 4 correspondence. It's up to the coach to see that the procedure was approved by the manufacturer and that the helmet meets the NOSCI standard. It's not you or I. I'm not looking for a stamp. If it's on the helmet, you've already asked at the pregame, is your equipment legal? And he answers yes. He's done the groundwork and made sure that that helmet with that C-flap is legal. All right, the proper pitching positions. I hate to keep bringing this up year after year, but it continues to rear its ugly head, so we got to get it from the get-go. From the first pitch on, please. From the windup, the pitcher's non-pivot foot shall be in a position on or behind a line extending through the front edge of the pitcher's plate. Take a look at it. It's very simple. That foot can be moved to wherever, but that non-pivot foot has to be on or behind a line through the front edge. All right? It's from the wind-up position. That's changed last year, the set position. The entire pivot foot does not have to be in contact with the pitcher's plate. It just has to be touching. It has to be parallel to, but in contact with. We recognize that many of the mounds, there's issues with it, so the entire pivot foot does not have to be in front of that pitcher's plate. Why do we have to keep talking about pitching position? Very simple. We're still running into what we call the hybrid, which it's illegal in high school and it's illegal in college. If you see it during the warm-ups, tell the coach, but during the game, you got to call it. Last summer I had a high school pitching coach, I won't name a name. We called the hybrid. He came out just all upset that his player had been using it all year and that nobody had called it. So I asked, because he was a pitching coach, a varsity pitching coach. I said, fine. Could you tell me which games he played? Because I will check to see which umpires were not calling it. We'll make sure that they get a phone call. He backed off real quick. But guys, this hybrid stuff has got to stop. Call it from the get-go. Take a look at it. If you see it during warm-ups, like I said earlier, talk to the coach, have them address it. Sometimes you may even want to tell the catcher. I'm not going to make a big scene, but we need to call that from the very first pitch. Actually, I don't want to be hearing this every year that nobody's calling it. During the plate conference, we asked the coaches about the players being properly equipped and your equipment legal. I also asked the coaches, please make sure there is no jewelry. Make sure the guys take the jewelry off. What I'd highly recommend is if you see some jewelry, right at the get-go, you make an announcement. Coach, this is your team warning. We have a jewelry infraction, and the next player will be ejected. Now this includes rubber bands, wristbands, rubber wristbands, nose rings, you name it. It is jewelry. Now, if it is a religious medallion, we know it has to be taped and worn under the uniform, and a medical alert must be taped and may be visible, however. But let's stop this jewelry. It's getting to the point where it's getting ridiculous. But it is a team warning, and the next player is ejected. So I'd like to just go through what tools we have as an umpire. It basically states here, in the case of a major offense, ejection can occur immediately. But typically steps like we like to talk about is giving them a warning. And a couple years ago it was brought to our attention that we must tell them that this is a verbal warning. Just knocking it off, tell them knock it off, or I've heard enough, I guess doesn't categorize itself as a warning. So now we have to basically say, Coach, this is your verbal warning. So that's kind of a, I don't want to hear one more word out of you type of thing. Don't ever say that one. And if a coach has received a verbal warning previously, he shall receive a written warning. Write down on your lineup card, and he will be restricted to the bench for the remainder of the game. And if he's been previously restricted to the bench with a written warning, he would be ejected for subsequent offense. Those are the three. I mean, you can go from 0 to ejection if need be. The one issue I brought up with the Coaches Association is I told them, I said, if any of my umpires ever talked to a coach the way some of the coaches talk to us, they would never officiate again in Ohio. It's got to stop. We're the adults out there. They may not like the call. Come out. Tell them come out. We'll talk to you. You come out in a gentlemanly fashion once time is called. But coming out as a raging bull screaming and hollering is just not working in their behalf. So that's why that's being addressed right now. Again, a penalty on 331. If the umpire judges an offense to be minor, the umpire shall issue a verbal warning, or in the case, next step would be a written warning. The coach has received his written warning. He's been restricted to the bench, and now he commits another offense. In this case, it's very simple. If you notice, he threw his hat down. You take your hat down, you're done. But any offense after he's been restricted to the bench will result in immediate ejection from the game. He has to leave the premises. He can't stand out by the fence. Guys, read through the ejection procedure. It's very clear, but the game will not continue until he is off premise. I don't wait till he just leaves a dugout. That's not part of it. He's got to get off the field and out of the line of sight this whole game. Can we go from nothing to immediate ejection? Sure can. If the umpire deems the offense to be major, we're talking physical contact, spitting, kicking dirt, throwing a base at somebody, throwing the base, period. It calls for immediate ejection from the game. Guys don't like to get that part. I haven't seen it very often in my career, but it can happen. And that is the final tool we have is you just throw them out and move on with the game. One of the big safety issues that was changed last year, and it really came to us, thank you, from football, was the lightning rule. If you remember, as the first point says, any lightning seen or thunder heard, evacuate the field and take cover, 30 minutes, record all necessary game information. Okay, we get the heck out. The issue is at night, and more teams are putting up night or lights and playing on synthetic turf. And under certain conditions, we'll be able to see that lightning in the distance, but we did not hear any thunder. And again, it looks like it's going to pose a very small threat, and we had to take those into consideration with the ruling. Prior to any game, I like to check my phone to see if there's a possibility of any weather coming in that we need to talk to the coaches about prior to the game, maybe at the plate conference. Many areas have these lightning detection devices, but never depend on this technology. Again, thunder heard and lightning seen takes precedence. If you stop the game, it's up to the coaches to get the players and get them off the field during the suspension of play. I tell the umpires to leave, go to your car, sit in your car, get away from it for that half hour. Do not stay at the field. Do not go in the dugout. I mean, some cases we can't help it, but run like hell. I've lost a friend to lightning. I don't mess with it. Again, if you're sitting in a car, please do not roll down your windows. Lightning has come in through windows and taken some people out. So it's very serious, and we don't have enough insurance to cover you. So if you suspend a play, end it, get out of there, tell them a half hour, do not come back until the storm is gone. And it's been at least a half hour since the last lightning or thunder. For Those of you who watched the 2019 College World Series, you may have noticed the Michigan players having placards both for offense and defensive calls. We've been fighting this for years in high school baseball. They are legal, the placards are legal, but not on the belt as illustrated here by the Michigan players. They had them for offense and then they changed them off for defense. In our case, if they're going to be wearing these and they're going to be calling 725 and they all have to look down, it has to be on their arm or wrist. It is not a belt placard. It's a placard that will be worn on the arm or wrist.
With guidance from the NFHS, the OHSAA and the Ohio Department of Health have established rule modifications for the sport as it relates to the COVID-19 pandemic. Please know that we created NFHS rule modifications, and there are also requirements and recommendations that must be followed throughout the year. Rule modifications are required to be implemented, and there may be additional modifications added throughout the season. The goal of the baseballs for this season is we're really trying to minimize the number of people that come into contact with the ball and trying to keep it within the teams. So each team is responsible for supplying game balls for use when they are on defense. A minimum of 3 balls are to be handed to the home plate umpire at the beginning of each half inning. Also, when a ball goes out of play, the defensive team shall retrieve the ball and provide another game ball to the home plate umpire. At the end of each half inning, the pitcher shall take the game ball with him to the dugout, and the catcher shall take all of the other balls from the home plate umpire to the dugout. Just a reminder that the baseballs still must meet the NFHS requirements and be in new or in good condition. Players and coaches should use their own equipment whenever possible. If equipment must be shared, so items like batting helmets or the baseball bats that are typically more shared than other equipment, proper sanitization is required between the use of each piece of equipment. Player and team equipment shall be sanitized before and after each practice or game. Players are not permitted to share water bottles, and there is no permission of team water coolers or shared drinking stations. All player personal items shall be properly separated and not shared as well. And we also have a few recommendations that you might consider at your school or site. It is recommended that sunflower seeds, gum, and similar products be prohibited on the field. And it is also recommended that each team consider having an equipment handler to remove bats and helmets from the field of play. This just would remove the umpire feeling like they need to remove the bats or helmets from the field. Regarding masks or facial coverings for players, they are recommended but not required while on the field of active play. However, they are required by all participants when they are not participating, so this would be in the dugout or bench area. If a facial covering is worn on the field, it may be of any number of colors but must not be the color of the baseball and not be distracting with some kind of wild design. Gaiters may be worn as face coverings, and just keep in mind that if face coverings are worn only when not participating on the field or in the dugout or bench area, there are no color or design restrictions. Now for coaches and other team personnel, face coverings are required at all times. So this includes during arriving and departing the facility and during active play. And gaiters may be worn as face coverings for coaches or team personnel. And just make sure to review the Ohio Department of Health sports order for any medical exceptions. Per guidance from the NFHS Sports Medicine Advisory Committee, the plastic face shields covering the entire face shall not be used unless they are integrated into the face mask and attached to a helmet. The reason because of this is the use of these hard items during practices or contests can increase the risk of unintended injury to the person wearing the shield and their teammates. There are a few limitations to the in-game pregame conference. Attendees are limited to the head coach only from each team plus the umpires. The coaches need to make sure to stay outside the width of the batter's box at home plate, maintaining 6 feet of distance between each person, and everyone attending this meeting must wear a facial covering. To eliminate too much exchange of the lineup cards, the lineup shall be handed to the umpire, and the umpire will verbally approve or ask any questions about the lineup. It is also recommended that lineup cards exchanged team to team and team to scorekeeper be shared electronically if possible, but again, this is not a requirement. For substitutions, all verbal exchanges should occur 6 feet from the coach or sub to the plate umpire. Subs shall be announced by the plate umpire to the opposing team's coach, again following 6 feet social distancing. Please note that coaches holding defensive conferences must stay on the plate side of the circle, and the player or players must be on the opposite side of the circle, maintaining the 6 feet social distancing. Only one coach is permitted during the conference, and when a coach visits the pitcher, all other players shall stay 6 feet apart. Team huddles without physical distancing are prohibited. It is the responsibility of the coach to ensure that players are legally equipped and the players and equipment is in compliance with the NFHS and OHSAA rules, the ODH modifications, and your local health department orders. Just another quick reminder that coaches shall wear face coverings at all time unless they meet a medical exemption. And I've kind of alluded to it a few times, but we just want to make sure that umpires are not handling the team equipment on the field during play. And any coach who wishes to discuss a rule or ruling on the field must maintain at least 6 feet of physical distance from the umpire. And a quick note to base coaches, please stay 6 feet from all runners at all times. For the bench and field conduct, we will definitely need coach and team personnel, making sure that our players and coaches are following these orders. Players are not permitted to leave the dugout area to congratulate players scoring or after home runs. And the number of individuals in the dugout is dependent on the size of the dugout. So we really want players and coaches to try to maintain 6 feet of social distance within the dugout. And NFHS rules does allow for the dugouts or designated warm-up areas to be extended to provide for social distancing. So if needed, these areas shall be clearly marked and located beyond the end of the dugout furthest from the home plate to ensure that 6 feet of social distancing. As we have applied to all of our sports seasons this year, we need to ask that players and coaches refrain from high fives, handshakes, and any other physical contact with teammates, opposing players, coaches, umpires, and fans. A tip of the cap or other non-contact gesture can be used following the game in lieu of the handshake line. An important note for infractions by the pitcher. So if a pitcher puts their hands to their mouth off the mound and touches the ball, time is called, a new ball is inserted, and the pitcher must sanitize their hands before throwing the next pitch. Also, a pitcher using a resin bag shall take that item to the dugout with them at the end of each half inning. Please note that this is not an exhaustive list of the COVID-19 guidelines, but I did just want to cover especially the rule modifications and majority of the requirements. And just a quick note, once these are approved by the Ohio Department of Health, they will be posted to the COVID-19 correspondence webpage. We also just need to all make sure we're working together to make sure everyone is following these guidelines. So make sure you're also working with your local health department in case they have any possibly stricter rules or that kind of thing. And we get the question about compliance with the rules. So compliance will be evaluated throughout the season by COVID-19 observers. We had these observers attend sporting events in the regular season and postseason in both the fall and winter sports, and plan to have them in place for the spring as well. And just the last note of just remembering to be flexible and understanding this year. We understand that you may not agree with all of the rule modifications or recommendations put in place, but these are the guidelines put in place so we're able to have a season. There are many state associations across the nation that are modifying their season, condensing the postseason, that kind of thing. And Ohio is one of the only states that has been able to have our entire regular seasons and postseasons without too many modifications on the season. So just keep that in mind moving forward, and we look forward to this great year. You have now completed the state baseball rules meeting. Please check your myOHSAA profile for your state meeting attendance, which should be reflected immediately. Please reach out to me with any questions you may have throughout the season or postseason. I'm always here to help, and make sure that you utilize the resources posted on the baseball webpage. Have a great season.